as Louis-Philippe mentioned, is about this paper that we just put together. And this paper is going to come out in the Review of Political Economy. And what we did was basically dividing the paper between two broad sections. The post-Keynesian section, where we take a look at the income distribution and monetary policy on post-Keynesians. And then the second section devotes to the Sraffian approach. And the objective of that paper was trying to look at the similarities and differences between the two approaches in order to try to build some connections and try to get some areas for possible research, future research, and so on. And we try to do, let's say, a history of the ideas where, and in many ways, the presentation that preceded us, like Mario and Mark, they did a lot of what I am supposed to talk about, because they basically explained to us about where does the passionality come from, and also this idea, these debates about the cyclicality of the passionality index, but also the passionality index as a norm, and these differences between the rentier groups and the non-rentier income shares. So what I would like to talk about is primarily to talk about the initiation of these ideas of income distribution and monetary policy in post-Keynesian thought. And we can start from, yeah. Yeah. And how much time will you have?
Oh, we can crunch the coffee.
It's fine.
We can squeeze in the lunch, so we'll have that.
The ideas of income distribution and monetary policy can be traced back to Keynes in his book Attract and Monetary Reform, 1923, and where he wrote this first chapter where he talks about changes in the value of money and how these changes would affect the distribution of income between social classes. And this is where Keynes was actually focusing on how, if the value of the real rate of interest changes, how does that affect the distribution of income, primarily between rentier or interest receiving income groups and non-interest receiving income groups. In this first chapter, he was concerned about what these kind of changes that were coming from the Victorian era in the 19th century, the end of the 19th century, how these changes and how these financial, let's say, effects of changes in the value of money, how this could impact the stability of the society. And he was, interestingly, he was not very concerned about the threat that workers can put on, let's say, social stability. He was instead focusing on rentiers and non-rentiers income groups. So that was very interesting. And then I think from that chapter, he really has some of the seeds of what would be later known as the income distribution of monetary policy. I think this how these changes in interest rates can affect income distribution, and this in turn can affect economic activity. But Yes, and then we go to John Robinson in his book. Yes, sorry, in her book, Capital Accumulation, the Accumulation of Capital, 1956.
Almost over now.
Yeah, and I think the accumulation of capital was very interesting because there Joan Robinson focused on how she defined this rentier or rentier income share in that I think it's chapter 24 and 25, and she defined this rentier income share, and also she for us, for Antonino and I, when we were yeah it's okay, you can see it. So there is no presentation.
No. It's
Okay. Yes, it's chapter 24, 25 on the accumulation of capital. She analyzed the interest rate as a distributional variable, but she defined this rentier share of profit. And it was no problem. Okay. Thank you. So it's here, and very importantly, here there is a connection with the Sraffian approach, because she really wanted to she looked at these interest income payments as a deduction from business profits. So we can see this connection from the Sraffian approach and the post-Keynesian approach that Antonino will talk about it further. And then we can see Luigi Pasinetti, which we have been talking about a lot. We have his book, 1981 book, Structural Change and Economic Growth, and also the paper that we were talking about in the JPTJE. And this, the rate of interest that preserves the rentier share, rentier income share is the rate of interest that preserves the purchasing power of the subletting labor time. And that's where the Pasinetti index comes from. And then we have what we call the Mavericks, post-Keynesians in the 1950s, where this is like actually cut. This was not like this. But it's okay. Here we have basically 5 people, which is Mario, Mark in 1988, in their paper in this book, Money, in the Keynes public policy. But we also have Chris Nigel in 1989. We also have Alfred Eigner in 1987. We also have Basil Moore in 1988. So what we argue in this paper is that it is not accidental that all these authors really put forward what we call the basis of the approach of the post-Keynesian approach of income, monetary policy and income distribution. Now, after the presentation by Mark and Mario, we can put maybe John Hudson here, maybe, or I don't know, maybe you tell me. And then our argument is that this is not accidental, because we were coming from very hard times in terms of the working class and the Volcker era, the Volcker policies that started at the early 1980s. So for post-Keynesians and the view on money, their endogenous demand-led money view, it was very, well, not very easy, but it was almost natural to see this kind of policy that would have tremendous impact on income distribution. Something that the mainstream didn't, like, were not really interested in. They were talking about the Volcker policies as a medicine, something that didn't have anything to do with the crisis, whereas post-Keynesians were looking at it as something that reinforced or even caused the crisis in the early 1980s. And then we have this John Smith thing that called the revenge of the rentiers. But the expression actually predates Smithin and Morris in 1982, which was just this utilization of a rentier first monetary policy. Here we have Alfred Egner in 1987. And interestingly, this is a chapter of his book, 1987. And he recommended a monetary policy that was to keep nominal interest rate equal or slightly above the rate of inflation. So just a positive real rate of interest. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Then we have Mario and Mark, and also Mario, a solo paper in 1988. And actually, it's very interesting because what you mentioned, Mario, your paper in this is ESME for Paris. Yeah, there is a working paper in the library of the University of Ottawa, dated 1987.
Yeah, so you found your paper?
Yes, I found it. It's in the library of Ottawa. Yes, yes. Yes, it's there. I just found it. Yeah, I think a couple of days back. Yeah, we have also Basile Moore. Yes, I think I talked about. Yeah, interestingly, they say about the impact of interest rates on financial asset values. That this can affect capital gains, but also Moore mentions that Keynes, he mentions, however, he claimed that at least with respect to financial assets, as opposed to say real interest assets, Keynes' view was that interest income payments would dominate capital gain as the primary redistribution force over time. These short-run capital gains will be offset eventually by lower future income streams in overall function of the income distribution. That's what Moore mentioned. Then we have Chris Nigel, but also importantly, Chris Nigel in this paper focuses a lot on personal income distribution. And he runs some econometric models. Then we have subsequent developments, and very importantly, in the 1990s and early 2000s, we have these new proposals coming from post-Keynesians advocating for following monetary policy rules. Because when we have in the 90s the Taylor rule proposals, and as a reaction and a very critical propositions, post-Keynesians wanted to have their own monetary policy rules that had income distribution considerations. And then we have these fascinating rules. And very interestingly, what Mark was talking about Eckhart Heine and his model, probably the only rule that might fit the model might be the passingness rule, because it will be the higher interest rate rule if labor productivity growth are positive and inflation are positive, because the other rule might not meet this Eckhart Heine rule. No? We have Rochon and Setterfield. And we have other more recent discussions, such as the distinction between the Passinati rule and the Passinati rule with labor command measure. And this is the debate that Louis-Philippe was talking about, that when inflation and productivity growth are very low, such as in an environment of secular stagnation, the differences between these three rules are trivial. But when inflation picks up, then it's when everyone starts to raise hands and say, hey, what should we do? And then we have this divergence between the different rules, depending what we want to adopt. That's it. Now, Antonino, thank you. That's cool. Sorry. That's cool. Yes, it works.
So thank you, Guillermo. Before to start, I would like to thank Louis-Philippe Rochon, Mario Seccareccia, Marc Lavoie and Guillermo Matamoros for hosting me for 6 months in a visiting period here in Canada this year. Thank you. Because this work was born in that period. This work tried to make a comparison between these two main heterodox approach. And in this part, we analyze the monetary theory of distribution, the Sraffian monetary theory of distribution, that was born with the work, this theory with the work of Piero Sraffa and Pierangelo Garignani, and their seminal work to try to make a revival of the theory of value and distribution of classical economists as Smith, Ricardo, and Karl Marx. In a post-Keynesian framework, some post-Keynesian as Davidson 1999 accused the Sraffian approach to give not so much importance, relevance to the role of the money. But other post-Keynesian as Marc Lavoie point out how the Sraffian were the first to claim that relative prices and real wages are affected by the trend level of the rate of interest. So in this paper, we analyzed in this part before the relationship between monetary policy and income distribution in classical economists and Marx. I'm going very briefly on this part, but a potential link. But unfortunately, there is no equation. A potential.
There you are high and then
A potential link between monetary policy and income distribution in this approach is given by the rate of profit equation that is equal to the interest rate that would represent the remuneration of financial capitalists and the normal profits of enterprise that represent the remuneration of non-financial capitalists that take the risk and trouble of employing capital productively. So for Smith, Ricardo, and Marx, income distribution follows social laws, not natural laws. So it's not explained by the marginal productivity of labor, but in many cases, real wages is given to a subsistence level determined by historical, social, and institutional circumstances. So even if, especially in Marx and Smith, monetary policy is not neutral because Marx and Smith represent in their work how financial condition can have an importance for the capital accumulation, especially in the Scottish case for Smith. But however, in this theory, monetary policy can't have an effect on income distribution between wages and profit. Why? Because real wages is given at a subsistence level, and the rate of profit would be the residual variable in this theory, determined by the technical condition of production, social product, and wages. But it's important to point out how Sraffa in 1996 underlined how if the wages is above its subsistence level, the rate of profit can be the independent variable in this system, being determined from outside the system of production, in particular by the level of the money rate of interest. From this insight was born the Sraffian theory of monetary of distribution with the works of Garignani, Panico, and Pivetti. So Pivetti 1985 pointed out how it's important to detect a more relevant role for the monetary policy into the income distribution, because in the modern capitalism there would have been a change in the main channels of income distribution. The two main channels in the modern capitalism would be the monetary policy and the wage bargaining. So in this theory, an important role is played by the monetary policy, that with an endogenous money view, that is an important common element between this view and the post-Keynesian framework, for Pivetti and Panigo, central banks is able to set the short-term interest rate. Pivetti refers directly to Caldor's horizontalist view, and for Lawa, it's important to underline how most views on endogenous money appear closer to those of the neo-Ricardians on the same subject than to the views of fundamentalist post-Keynesian defending Keynes liquidity preference. But another point in common between these two approaches is that the central bank can control also the long-term interest rate that are the most important interest rate to explain the relationship between monetary policy and income distribution. As postulated by Pivetti in his main work, long-term interest rate would be an autonomous component of normal production cost. In this system, under the free competition of the firms, so the firms tend to increase prices when there is an increase in normal production cost as real interest rate and wages. So now we have the equation good. So that is the system of price equations in the Sraffian framework. We have that given the money wages W, given the normal profits of enterprise and P that are stable, that is a stable magnitude, and given the methods of production, so the matrix A and the coefficient of levels L, a persistent increase in long-term real interest rate can cause, caused by a shift in the monetary regime. So we should have a permanent increase in interest rate, can lead to an increase in normal production cost and for this via an increase in price level. Then, given the money wages, we can have a decrease in the real wages and an increase in the rate of profit. But it's very important to underline that for this framework, the channel of wage bargaining is always an important channel. For example, if we have a continuous increase in nominal wages, we can have a change in income distribution because we can have a permanent rise in real wages if central bank doesn't increase interest rate to try to offset this increase in nominal wages. So in this framework, it's a scenario in which two main actors are the central bank and the wage bargaining. Then, with this theory, so we can have an explanation of the Gibson paradox, a relationship underlined also by Keynes in 1913, in which there is a positive relationship between interest rate and prices. In this framework, so capital profitability should adjust after variation in interest rate. But we tried also to underline some links between post-Keynesian theory and Sraffian theory on the determinants of the markup. Because as underlined also by Lawa 1995 and 2022 and Lehman Setterfield 2010, there are many post-Keynesian that try to underline how the interest rate can be a determinant of the rate of profit, not the only determinant, but can be one of the several determinants. Many contributions, for example, in Okay, there is also the contribution of Kappes that in 1971 underlined how interest rate would be included in the overhead cost. So an increase in interest rate should increase the markup set by firms. Also, Kaldor in 1982 pointed out how interest costs are passed on in higher prices in much the same way as wage cost. And it's important also to underline the contribution of Harrod that maintains how sustained low interest will presumably in the long run reduce the normal profit rate. We have other main contributions, but last two interesting contributions because John Robinson firstly tried to support this positive relationship between interest rate and markup, but then John Robinson criticized and defined this idea an inexplicable suggestion. Bryce's view is opposite has development compared to John Robinson's view because Bryce first criticized very strongly Pivetti work of 1985, I think, and then in 2007 Bryce supported this idea. So then to make a drastic comparison between these two main approaches, we tried also to underline some Sraffian or classical Keynesian contribution about the Volcker era. Very briefly, Pivetti underlined how before the Volcker era, there was a golden age of the capitalism because one of the factors was that central bank was able to keep low real interest rate to control the differential between interest rate and growth rate of the economy. After the Volcker period, with the advent of Reagan and Thatcher, but this scenario changed. And for example, Pivetti tried to show how there was a shift in the social power relationship with a shift that favored the financial capitalist, so the financial social classes, and there was a strong decrease in the wage share and a strong increase in the profit share. This analysis, we can find these elements also in the analysis of De Cecco and Vianello, and for De Cecco and Vianello was important to underline how there were strong pressure against the Carter government to adopt against Carter government against the Federal Reserve to adopt strongly restrictive monetary policy to keep the dollar to a very strong level. So these interpretations of the Volcker era can show us how in this approach the setting of interest rate is a very complex phenomenon, and it's affected by several influences, as for example fiscal, foreign, and distributional issues, and as noted by Maurice Dobb, Sraffian's analysis showed the possibility that the interest rate and therefore the profit rate are somehow fixed by some kind of quasi-political or institutional decision mechanism. So in this political nature of interest rate, we don't find the definition of a proper monetary policy rule, but as it's possible to see by Pivetti views of Volcker era, for this approach is very important to keep low interest rate and to favor cheap monetary policies. So the first similarity is that in both these parameters, money is endogenous from an horizontalist perspective, the central bank can set the short-term interest rate, but can have also tight control on long-term interest rate. In this box framework, we think that interest rate is a political and distributed variable. There is no natural interest rate, and there is a strong refusal of fine-tuning policies, as in the neoclassical terror rules. In this both framework, monetary policy can have long lasting effects on income distribution, and there is a low elasticity of output after to interest rate change. And it's important to underline that in both framework, full employment and redistribution policies that should be favored both with a coordination of fiscal and monetary policy. But now we pass at the differences. And the first difference is that the interest rate in the Sraffian approach with wage above the subsistence level is the main determinant of the profit rate. Instead, in the post-Keynesian approach, can be one of the determinant of the rate of profit. Post-Keynesian focus their analysis also between the dualism between the rentier versus non-rentier classes, whereas Sraffians underscore that the link that workers against not workers classes, even if these two approaches are not activist. In the post-Keynesian framework, we have a parking approach. We have a monetary policy rule. We don't try a precise monetary policy rule in the Sraffian approach. And the last difference is that the focus is on functional income distribution in the box approach, but there are post-Keynesian works that also try to deal with the personal income distribution. Thank you for your attention.